While I was yet in my sin, he saved me. While that is an awesome statement and very true, that's not how my story begins. My name is Laura, a humble and grateful believer in Jesus Christ who walks with me through many struggles, including pride in the form of codependency and difficulty maintaining priorities. I'd like to give some background information on how Jesus has worked to overcome feelings of abandonment, rejection, and worthlessness. My story starts as I'm delivered to an unwed mother who was chosen to give me up for adoption. I was taken from her, and although she wasn't allowed to see me, she knew I was a girl, and in her heart named me Deanne. After 9 days, I was placed with a family of 3, a father, a mother, and an older brother. I was told stories of how my brother would climb into my crib to comfort me, but as I aged, I only felt his annoyance toward me. Mom was a hard-working woman. She had to be. Her husband was very ill. He was a pulpit minister and was no longer able to perform his job. So my daddy was my world growing up. He was my biggest source of love and acceptance. And by the time I was 4, my family had moved to Mountain View, Missouri. I did not know it at the time, but he had gone home to die. He wanted to be close to his mama when he passed. When we moved to Mountain View, I got to meet my grandmother. She was also a source of love and acceptance. Some of my earliest memories are spending the night with her on Fridays and Sunday dinners after church. My family often told me about being adopted. Friends and family would tell me how lucky I was to have the Frank family. It didn't take long to figure out that being adopted was not the norm. The question started to arise. Why didn't my real mom want me? What was wrong with me? So, something must be wrong or she wouldn't have given me away. I decided that I was unlovable. I told you Daddy's health was... Never mind. Since Daddy was sick, the roles were reversed in our family. He was the nurturer, the caregiver, while Mom went to work in a factory and was the breadwinner and disciplinarian. Not long after moving, we began to attend the Church of Christ, where I caught the eye of an older boy whose interests were impure. Since our parents were friends, he had several opportunities to act on his impure intentions. One night at my house, he had me follow him into the bathroom, observed by my mother, who later told me I shouldn't go in the bathroom with boys. As I've looked back on the whole situation, I wondered how or why she didn't put together the clues. Her seeming inattention and lack of compassion toward me added more fuel to the fire that was starting in me, the unworthiness, the feelings of being inconsequential. Not long after this incident, his family moved away, leaving me with feelings and longings I didn't understand, but I wanted to replicate. Because of Daddy's poor health, he took a nap every afternoon. He was an active 5-year-old. Nap was not in my vocabulary. And it was during this time that I began looking for ways to replace the sensations that boy had awakened in me. Since I didn't know exactly what he did, I couldn't replicate those feelings. I even tried to involve the little boy next door. His mother soon became aware of the inappropriateness of our actions or encounters and moved away. In recent years, I've wondered if his mother ever tried to talk to my family. It was never mentioned by my family. Eventually, I gave up trying to replicate those sensations and just started stuffing them. Now, when I was in kindergarten, I got the love of my life, a little baby doll. Her name was Mary Ann. I snuck her to school with me one day, and it was so much of a distraction that my teacher had me put her down for a nap until playtime. To my horror, when I retrieved Mary Ann, her leg had fallen off. I was inconsolable. Our principal was Mr. Bostic, a tall, stern-faced man who was quite intimidating. He called me into his office later that afternoon, and to my delight, he presented me with Mary Ann, her leg reattached. I'm telling you about Mr. Bostic because he no longer walks this world, and I cannot go back and thank him for the care and compassion he showed to a little girl and her doll. The desire to be accepted and loved still raged within me. Do you remember the first time a person of the opposite sex told you you were pretty? I do. was in second grade on the playground. He told me I was pretty. Pretty in two ways. Pretty ugly and pretty apt to stay that way. I was devastated. Time rolls on and the days become years. Church camp was a highlight of my youth, and we often had counselors from York College. One of those counselors was Robert Flores, and he gave a devotional that was so moving and touching, I needed to be baptized. I called my parents to share with them my decision, just knowing they would want to come and be a part of this wonderful event. And while I was told they were proud of me, they would not be in attendance, increasing the feelings that I just didn't matter. The other side of the coin I didn't stop to consider at 11 was that it was a 2.5-hour drive from our house to where I was at camp. Now, a couple things had taken place in our family by this time. My brother, who had been diagnosed with juvenile diabetes when I was 5, it must have been watching those nurses take care of my brother when I knew that nursing was in my future. Mom had also chosen to be a nurse to better be able to provide for 2 teenagers. In January, the year after I turned 11, Daddy was admitted to the hospital where Mom worked as a nurse. One afternoon while playing with the neighbors, I received a phone call, which was weird. Mom was asking that I have the neighbors drive me to the hospital. And even though nobody had told me what was happening, I turned to Mrs. Ross and told her that my daddy had just died or was getting ready to, and that they needed to take me to the hospital. Even though Daddy was dying and Mom worked in the hospital, there were rules, and minors didn't get to go into the ICU. At this point, the feelings that had been steadily growing became a raging inferno. I felt that since I wasn't a real part of their family, I didn't have the right to grieve. So again, began stuffing feelings. Mom, caught up in her own grief, didn't know what to do with me. So that Friday evening, I attended a basketball game with a dear friend of the family. My friends were incredulous, finding out that Daddy had passed away that afternoon. With no guidance or no direction, I didn't know anything but to follow my normal routine, which meant skating on Saturday morning. Again, my friends were stunned at the news of Daddy's passing and questioned my love and devotion to him for the seeming lack of effect his passing had had on me. No one knew the depth of my pain or how much I had lost in his passing. Sunday night, the feelings of being lost and alone were overwhelming, and I asked my mother if I could sleep with her. Still and quiet were not words that have ever described me. But this was her request, to be able to sleep with her that night. I struggled mightily to fulfill her request, and then sleep finally found me. Monday morning arrived, the day we were going to bury Daddy. Little did I know that puberty had made its first appearance. I was so sick and weak, it was decided that I would not attend Daddy's funeral. So I stayed home alone while everybody else went to the funeral. It was I've never felt so alone as I walked through that house, and there was absolutely nobody there. They had all gone to say goodbye to the man I loved more than anything. I must have done a pretty convincing job of playing the confident, able child. Now that Daddy had gone and left me with that woman, the feelings of abandonment were always near the surface. During this time, Grandma had lost her house in a fire, and she stayed with us after her release from the hospital, and then moved to a trailer nearby where I would visit her often. Time marches on, and the next thing I know, 7th grade has begun. 2 neighboring towns came together to form our high school, grades 7 through 12. It took very little time of being compared to my big brother to realize I hated following in his footsteps. With my only source of love and affection gone, I began looking for replacements. I didn't really know what I was looking for, but I was friendly and open to attention, especially male attention. This earned me quite the reputation through high school, although I didn't do a fraction of what was said about me. Mom had set specific rules about dating, and by the time I was 15, I had a steady boyfriend. He had a car and would often drive me home after school. He would come to church, and Mom allowed him to come over several times for dinner. After 6 months of Jerry being a perfect gentleman, My brother talked my mom into letting us go out on a car date alone. Alone led to parking on dark roads. Kissing led to backseat fumblings. I remember the boy when I was 5 that awoke in all those feelings? Well, I suppressed all of those. With my first sexual encounter, many of those memories came flooding back. The guilt and the shame weighed on my heart, and I began to withdraw and tried so hard to stuff those feelings back down and far away. One night, as my mother and brother were having a conversation that must have been sexual in nature, my guilt and my shame became overwhelming, and I informed them that I was no longer a virgin and ran to my room crying, expecting Mom to come and talk to me, right? She never came. There was that feeling again of being inconsequential. That summer, we hosted a gospel meeting. The speaker was powerful, and I was full of guilt and shame. His message convicted me, and I wanted to be rebaptized. I had confessed to the generalness of my sin at 11, but now I knew I had specific sin. My baptism brought my soul some peace. My boyfriend grew tired of my sullen mood and the lack of intimacy, so we broke up. I didn't know how to give voice to my feeling or budding convictions, but still seeking acceptance and love, I was looking for it in all the wrong places, which only increased the feelings of unworthiness and unlovability, continuing to add to the guilt and shame that were now my constant companions. The highlight of school came my senior year. I got to take health occupations, which was the first step toward my goal of being a nurse. The teacher was a family friend and like my second mom. As I grew, she became not only my teacher, but my mentor and my friend. I was blessed to have the opportunity recently to tell her how much she had impacted my life. High school came to a close, and my best friend was heading off to nursing school. But I chose a different path. I chose to attend York College, thinking finally I would be surrounded by godly people. Surely I would find someone who would love and accept me and fulfill my mind, body, and soul. Unrealistic expectations? My sophomore year, I met the man that I would marry. We left York College at the semester break, and his family allowed me to move in with them. His mother took me under her wing and taught me many things, including how to cook and maneuver around Oklahoma City by myself. A daunting task. I shared my story with my husband about being adopted and my desire to find my birth family. One day, he surprised me by taking me to the place from which I had been adopted. In the 60s, adoptions were closed, so they couldn't give me any information. They suggested I open a file stating I wanted to be found, and that way if my birth family ever came looking for me, they could give my information out. I did this in short order. Shortly before Brian and I married, he signed up for active duty in the Army, and we moved to Augusta, Georgia. Our next duty station was Fort Hood, Texas, and I was thrilled to find out we were expecting. As my belly began to increase in size, so did my husband's critical nature. His criticisms gave way to emotional abuse, and it seemed to me the harder I tried to be a good Christian wife, the worse he became. We worked in tandem a while, him being critical and emotionally abusive, while I would have feelings of unworthiness and unlovability grew exponentially. I began using food to stuff down my emotions. When our daughter turned 5, Brian was stationed in Korea. We talked about the fact that I thought 5 years between children was too much, and asked him to have a vasectomy, which he complied with. It wasn't long after this that he called to ask forgiveness of his first affair. If I were a good Christian woman, I had to forgive him and take him back, right? That's how he convinced me. Each deployment only seemed to add another indiscretion to his list, adding more fuel to the unlovability fire in my heart. Another bright spot, October 1998. It had been almost 11 years since Brian took me to find out about my birth family. One evening I returned home. Brian didn't say anything to me, he just handed me the receiver of the phone and turned around and walked off after dialing the phone. A little bit later, a lady answered the phone. I explained to her my confusion and didn't know what was going on. And she asked my name and asked if I was sitting down. And then she revealed my birth mother was on the phone. They had finally found me. We visited several times, and they lived in western Oklahoma while we were living in Oklahoma City, and we decided to meet at a halfway point. As we drove to the meeting place, the feelings were jumbled and twisty, each fighting for its place to be recognized and acknowledged. From the moment I laid eyes on her, the years of doubting her love for me subsided. I felt more whole than I had in my entire life as she wrapped her arms around me. That day, not only did I get to meet my mother, I got to meet a sister, her husband and children, along with my mom's husband. I didn't realize it at the time, but I took no one else's feelings into consideration as I began to develop a relationship with my birth family. It was the most selfish thing I'd ever done. We enjoyed our days sharing pictures and stories. She even had pictures of my birth father, and I was thrilled at the possibility of getting to meet him. But she had to tell him first. Can you imagine that phone call? Yeah, remember me? 31 years ago? It was a girl. It took him a while to come to accept the fact that I truly was his. Mom and I talked on a regular basis, and we made several trips out to see her, eventually meeting another brother and another sister. There was one brother who refused to meet me. It was disappointing, but it did not detract from the joy of developing relationships with the others. Brian, being dissatisfied with his work-play income balance, applied for a position with the Air National Guard. He was granted a position necessitating our move to Wichita. Soon after arriving in Wichita, we began attending East Point Church of Christ. Now, if you remember back during my pregnancy, I told you I began to use food to stuff the emotional hurt. I had done many things to keep my weight in check, including Jenny Craig. But nothing had worked for very long. And then I was introduced to Way Down Workshop and began to view food in a new light. My weight still fluctuates, but as always, when I submit to God and His plan, things are so much better. I began working in the Derby school system with autistic children. Although the teacher was the most difficult boss I've ever had, I learned so much from her. And I took the opportunity about 2 years ago to go and see her and tell her how much I appreciated her and the things that I had learned. And I'm still using some of those things to this day. By the time 2001 rolled around, Brian's indiscretions continued to mount, and I was done and asked for a divorce. Counseling was suggested, and to my absolute astonishment, he agreed. We resolved to stay together, but I feel Brian soon became weary of trying to meet the expectations of his too conservative family. He finally consented to a divorce in 2003. Although I enjoyed my job at the school, it was quite apparent that I wasn't going to make enough money to support myself and my daughter. I decided it was finally time to do what I'd always wanted, be a nurse. There were several steps to go through before I could even apply for school. The first was to obtain my CNA license, which I did and began working at Larksfield Place. It felt so good to be working toward my career goal. Learning to negotiate the world as a single mom took some adjustment. It was almost 4 years before I was finally ready to apply for nursing school and was accepted into the first night program WATC offered for LPNs. By this time, my birth mom, Anne, had been diagnosed with cancer and had multiple treatments, not to mention a trach and a feeding tube. The treatments were successful, and eventually she and her husband moved to Alaska to live with my sister and her family. Then one day the test showed a shadow. The cancer was back. She wanted to continue seeing the same doctor she had had before, so she moved by herself back to Oklahoma. Soon it became apparent that she was unable to stay by herself, so she moved with me and Leanne to Wichita. Although I loved having my mom close, it was a very busy time with work and school and driving mom back and forth to Oklahoma for treatments. Something was going to have to give, and I decided to quit nursing school, much to the disapproval of my classmates and instructors. Well-meaning as they were, I knew that mom came first. I could always go back to school. During the time mom was living with me, her husband was still living in Alaska with their oldest daughter and her family. His health was not good, and the inevitable happened. He passed away. Mom was crushed. The good news, the tumor was responding to treatment and had shrunk a small amount. Now, Mom was not one to complain, but one day she did voice a concern to her doctor. She had developed a fistula in her neck. That's a hole that ran from the side, inside her throat to the outside of her neck. He looked at me questioningly. I said she hadn't mentioned it to me, and he seemed to dismiss her claim. So as we got home, she tapped me on the shoulder and took a big drink of coffee, and the fluid came out the side of her neck. I immediately got on the phone to call this doctor. Did not praise him to his staff. My biggest regret is the way I handled that situation. I believe that he was angry with us and did not put her on the next treatment schedule, because when we arrived the next week for treatment, there was no appointment for her. So we changed doctors and moved her care to Wichita. Upon the first examination, the doctor told her that the tumor was growing aggressively and that she was no longer a candidate for treatments, suggesting hospice care. That evening, she was admitted into Harry Hines inpatient unit. To my utter disbelief, I received a phone call the next day saying that she had passed away. Once again, I found myself lost and alone. My guilt over her dying in that hospital room alone was overwhelming at times. I knew she had a relationship with Jesus, and I was not worried about where she would spend eternity. But that did not absolve me of feeling like I had let her down when she needed me the most. The world marches on regardless of individual feelings or situations. And after discussing with the dean of Wichita Area Technical College my reasons for dropping out of nursing school and my wish to reapply, I was allowed to start the following January. In the meantime, Leanne had a new boyfriend and wanted to invite him and his poor old bachelor dad over for Thanksgiving dinner, which I agreed, and we had an enjoyable evening. Bob and I saw each other on a daily basis after that. Bob was more than encouraging in the matter of my attending school. Him being a nurse, he offered to help me with whatever I needed for school. One of my favorite ways that he helped was I supplied all the groceries, and he would go to my house and he'd cook dinner for the kids and then bring me dinner at school. His support and encouragement was salve to my soul. Now, you remember I dropped out of nursing school to take care of Mom. And since I dropped out so late in the semester, essentially I failed 3 classes. Starting a new program with a negative GPA, that was a daunting task. The year flew by, and I loved learning new things. Then you get to clinicals where you apply what you learn and learn more stuff. Color me happy. By this time, Leanne had moved out and was working as a photography assistant, well on her way not only to being the lead photographer, but to owning the studio. Bob and I continued to date, work, and school. Spending time with him left room for anything else. The biggest thing that was neglected was attending church. I still loved God and was thankful for his blessings. There just didn't seem time to join with the saints on a regular basis. Misplaced priorities. With my weak faith and lack of commitment, mixed with his more indulgent lifestyle, caused a few problems along the way. But we are committed to Christ and to each other, praying daily to be his hands and feet. After nursing school, I was blessed to be able to stay at Larksfield Place as a nurse until 2012, when I was fired for not fitting in with the new environment. I was devastated. I'd never been fired before. Bob continued to be supportive, allowing me to grieve the loss of my job for 3 months, at which time I took the advice of a friend and looked into home health. God has been at work all through this story. I've always known he created me to be a nurse, though I thought it would be for geriatrics. God had other things in mind. As I applied to the home health, the gal that was interviewing me had a CR study book on her desk, which I recognized because I had just started CR myself. When I discovered this job would be with kids, I almost walked out. But I took it as a sign with us both being in CR, and I took the job. CR began, and I rushed through the homework on Wednesday mornings right before class, taking little time to let the thoughts and words and scriptures penetrate my heart. Thank goodness, God's word does not return void. Even though I was not 100% dedicated, my heart softened, and healing was becoming evident. So how did God work in my story? He protected me from myself and my less than safe practices. He took my guilt and shame when I confessed to him and my sponsor about the little neighbor boy. He softened my heart toward my adopted mom when it was revealed that she had talked to my brother, who was a big part in my birth family actually being able to find me when the time came. She may not have known how to show me love and affection on a day-to-day basis, but she did understand the deep-seated need I had to find my birth family and ensured that my brother would help me when the time came. As an adult, God showed me how to be obedient when it came to food, although I still struggle in this area. He used meeting my birth mom to melt away the searing pain of being unlovable. He used the people in my step study to help me see, admit, and express joy in my God-given talents, which include compassion and empathy for hurting people. God has given me courage to believe his truth instead of continuing to listen to Satan's whispering. Celebrate Recovery has given me hope and taught me not only to accept grace, but to show it to others. He called me to be a nurse and then challenged me with kids. To my surprise and his glory, I have enjoyed more than any other job I've ever had. It's not an easy path, the one of submissive self-discovery, but because of my desire to be a willing vessel, to align my walk and talk to that of Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit, I will journey on, thankful for CR, where we have a working model of spirit-filled godly support. If you struggle, I invite you to come. Let's encourage one another as we strive to keep in step with the Holy Spirit. Thank you for letting me share.